I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
When Ubisoft announced and showed the gaming public Far Cry 5 for the first time, I was very intrigued with the direction that they would take with the franchise. I hadn't played the fantastic Assassin's Creed Origins yet, so would Far Cry 5 just be more of the same for the series? Welcome to MaxPowerPlay, an unbiased and passionate place to talk about everything in the gaming industry. Be sure to check out the other gaming opinions, news and reviews, and let me know anything you would like discussed. With Far Cry 5, Ubisoft has delivered a great addition to their long-running series. It isn't perfect, and it still brings over some problems from the previous games, whilst also introducing some new ones. But even still, the game is simply fun to play, and in certain areas, it has a high level of polish, which is what players want from all games, but especially from Ubisoft, who have let gamers down in the past with poor launches of certain games. For those gamers who have never been a fan of the Far Cry series, then I don't really see this sequel changing your mind and turning you into a fan. You will probably find some fun in the game, but the general makeup of it is very similar to other games in the franchise. It is still an open world with a huge map, littered with various icons and a huge sense of freedom to participate in what you want, when you want. Playing the game on the Xbox One X is a feast for the eyes, with the graphics having a level of detail that isn't apparent in many games. And then there is the 4K resolution on top, which gives the whole world a level of detail that is incredible, and it really brings the setting of Montana to life. With textures being of a generally high standard, a very solid 30 frames per second frame rate, and a huge draw distance, the only slight weakness may be a little fogging in the background when it comes to those huge draw distances, but it's never an issue or a problem, as the rest of the visuals are of an incredibly high standard, especially on the Xbox One X. Music takes a back seat in the game, but it suits it very well, and when the music does get played, it is just fantastic, and I found myself just sitting back and listening to it, whether it was one of the main themes in the game or the music that comes on the radio when driving around, especially the religious songs, which just sets a great tone for the game and adds to the setting. The general gameplay is similar to others in the series, so those expecting Far Cry 5 to be vastly different to its predecessors may be disappointed. Gunplay feels tighter to me, and it was always satisfying to take down enemies with the assortment of different weapons, even though I favoured the bow and arrows and silenced firearms. I found the slide mechanic to be very beneficial when playing, whether it was sliding in behind cover as enemies were shooting at me, or quickly hide myself before they could spot me. It reminded me a lot of the slide mechanic in Destiny, and found myself using it constantly. Saving NPCs from the hands of the cult that you will see on the side of the road was a decent addition to the game, but tended to ignore these as the game went on, as they started to feel like busy work and didn't really offer much outside of a handful of items and some cash. They began to feel forced, as they wouldn't move around much or pass through an area, so what was the point of holding a hostage on the side of the road, never to move? Something else needed to be added to the situations to really make them feel like you were making a difference. I'd rather them happen far less often, but be more meaningful when they do. I also found enemies seem to spawn out of nowhere sometimes, especially when alarms were raised. It wasn't a big problem, but it would have been nice for Ubisoft to make it more realistic, as these more minor issues tend to stick out more for me because the game is of such a high quality. Players will find themselves hunting wildlife, liberating outposts to gain influence in the different areas of the world, and destroying and blowing up the cult assets. These were fun to be a part of, and although they didn't differ too much from each other, they were enjoyable to partake in, then watching your allies move into the area and set up a base. But one problem with the NPCs though was, apart from the main ones in the game, the ones drifting out in the game world are only a couple of steps up from the ones seen in Bethesda games. They can be very stiff and act unrealistically, which pulled me out of the world I was in, and it's something that needs to be of a higher quality in future games. Needing to explore the game world instead of climbing radio towers as in previous games is a much better way to open up the map, and encourages exploration from players to walk or drive around to discover other settlements and outposts. The setting of Montana is perfect for this, as you come across rivers, mountains, forest areas and farmland. Just exploring the world was great, as it was a place I wanted to know more about. Players will have the story missions, but also a large number of side missions, which will be given to you by supporting characters or helping other people in the world. These help to flesh out the world somewhat, but I did find myself growing tired of many of them, and simply wanted to focus more on the main missions and progressing the story. One issue I did have with the story, and which I mentioned before the game's release in my Far Cry 5 preview video, was that I didn't want certain scripted moments to break up the flow of the main story, and unfortunately, that is what happened in the final game. For a game that affords the player so much freedom, I didn't like having control stripped away suddenly, or that regardless of what I was doing, I would eventually get to the point in the story where a predetermined scenario would play out. The story itself is very good, but would have liked Ubisoft to push it even further and really tackle some controversial topics, but they don't go too far, which is a concern I had before the game released. It's still interesting, and a great job has been done with each of the villains in the game, such as Joseph, Jacob, John and Faith. Each of them is developed very well, and their voice acting is of a high standard, and I found myself glued to the screen whenever they would show up. These characters and their involvement with the cult in this setting really was a great move from the developers. So, all up, Ubisoft has done a great job with Far Cry 5. If they can still iron out some of the smaller issues with the game, then Far Cry 6 could really be amazing. How did you like Far Cry 5? Is there anything you would change or something you didn't like about it? Please let me know in the comments, and as always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is Max Power, and I'll see you next time on Max Power Play.